hands firmly on my shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes and said these 15 words that I'll never forget. They said, "We found him, he's not alive, and it's clear that he's done it to himself." And that was all I recall them saying. I then just remember thinking I was going to be sick.
Those are the 15 words that Caroline Roodhouse was told when her husband Steve's body was found after he unexpectedly went missing. In the aftermath of everything that losing a loved one to suicide brought into Caroline's life, she's evolved from a place of being a victim of loss by suicide to a survivor, and in her own words, even a thriver because of it. Reflecting on her personal thoughts and feelings in her book, Daddy Blackbird, Caroline is very open and honest about the impact Steve's death had on her and their 2 daughters. Despite everything, it's a story of hope. But just before we get underway, a reminder. These conversations are often difficult and can be upsetting. So if you need support, please do press pause and get some help. You'll find all the details for Mikey's Line in the show notes to this podcast. I'm Dan Holland, and this is Speaking of Suicide. Caroline, can you tell us about Steve? What sort of man was he? Introduce us to him.
I would be delighted to. Thank you, Dan. Steve was a wonderful guy. He was a thoroughly decent chap, I think is probably the best way I would describe him. He was funny, he was kind, he was always putting other people's needs before his. He was a little bit unsure of himself. He wasn't like a hugely confident person, but that kind of added to his charm. And at work, he was known as a motivational and really inspirational leader. In fact, people today still tell me that they wouldn't be in the roles they were in had it not been for Steve. So, yeah, all in all, there was nothing you could find to dislike about him.
It sounds like a lovely man. One of his friends, Elaine, wrote about him for you in your book, and we're going to hear some of the readings throughout our conversation. But I wonder if you'd be happy to read what Elaine wrote about Steve for us.
She said, "When I first met Steve, it felt like we'd known each other forever. Such was the gift that he had to put people at ease. We met at a party, and that was it, firm friends. Steve seemed fearless. He liked fast rides and daredevil stunts. He was always up for a good laugh and had a dry, wicked sense of humour. As a girl in her 20s who'd moved to a new town, he took me under his wing and showed me his manner. We had so much fun in those days. Parties, movies, nights at the pub. He even introduced me to one of his old school friends who later became my husband. The strength of our friendship never diminished, even in the times when we didn't see each other much, as life took us along different paths. We just slotted back in as if no time had passed. I still remember him excitedly telling me he thought he had found the one and bringing her to meet us. Caroline came into his life and it opened his heart even further. He'd found a kindred soul with the same adventurous spirit and the very same dry sense of humour. You could see the depth of feeling he had almost immediately. She was definitely the one.
How did you guys meet? Tell us about your early life together after you met.
Yeah, so I'd been in a relationship with somebody else, which hadn't worked out particularly well. And not long after that, a mutual friend had said to me, "I know this chap I work with, he's lovely, you get on really well." And I said, "Absolutely no way, I'm not interested in another relationship." And the next thing I knew, I was sat in Yates's Wine Lodge with a bunch of their colleagues from work. And she'd strategically placed us directly opposite each other to have a casual drink together. And then I don't think there was a day I didn't see him after that. We hit it off straight away. He worked in a bank at the time, as did I, so we started talking about that. We were both doing banking exams and didn't really want to be. We'd much rather have been travelling the world, and that was the thing that kind of brought us together completely, our love for adventure. So our friend was very smug after that for her successful matchmaking.
It sounds like you were both sort of a bit of a free bird spirits. Is that what you think kind of brought you together and made your relationship as it was?
Absolutely. It was definitely one of the things. I also, as I said, I'd been in a difficult relationship and had a few challenges growing up, and he was a perfect combination of having this adventurous side, but also being a really solid, stable, reliable person, which drew me to him completely. He was a bit older than me too, which I think helped a little bit. But no, he had the right combination of everything that I needed at that point in time. And I guess I did for him too.
What was life like for you both as your love and your relationship blossomed into marriage?
Where he'd been travelling around the world, he'd kept in touch with all of his friends. And I didn't have a huge amount of friends at the time. So I just kind of slipped into his friendship group, and he took me to meet all of these friends, whether that was in Spain or Ireland or Australia. And we travelled together and had adventures everywhere. We loved listening to music. We loved eating out and making food together. We did all of those things that people do when they first get together and don't have children yet. And loved all of it. And he had an old Victorian house, which was lovely in a nice area, but it did need a bit of work doing. And I don't think he was particularly interested in doing the work on it. I do recall him riding his mountain bike around the living room, which had lots of holes in the floorboards, and he didn't seem to care. He was due to go off on a trip to Australia himself, which I didn't join him on. He went away for 3 weeks, which was a few months after we'd met, and we missed each other desperately. And I recall seeing him being away as an opportunity to redecorate his entire house, which he didn't mind. And then before he came back, he phoned me and said, I really want you to move in and would love you to move in ready for when I'm back. And then from then on, we lived together.
It sounds like you're incredibly happy together. Were there tough times for him? You've alluded to a previous difficult relationship, but what about Steve?
He had a few ups and downs with parents and family, and I think his dad would like him to have followed in his footsteps. He worked for the Bank of England, which was why Steve ended up in banking, but would, I think, prefer to have been travelling the world in a beat-up old VW, which was his happy place. As life went on, though, after we'd got married, things started to go downhill generally. His dad was diagnosed with a brain tumour, and he died after about a year. It was only about a year later, once his mum was starting to get back on her feet, that she was hit by a car, and she died on that day. And the following year, my dad died from lung cancer. So we lost 3 of our 4 parents in the space of 3 years. We then had our first daughter. I was pregnant when his dad had died, and she was quite poorly, Evie, when she was born. So that kind of added to the challenges that we had, and we were getting tired by then. And then when we'd been on our honeymoon, actually, I'd fallen from a balcony and broken my spine. So there was kind of challenges with the pain that I was managing as well. So there were lots of things that we were dealing with that I think all seemed to come in a very short space of time. He just got on with things. He put other people's needs first, as he always did, and he just got on with things and looked after us, and never really spoke about the impact of all of these tragedies and traumas that we'd experienced.
I think one of those things alone would be very hard to deal with. It must have been very difficult for both of you to be young parents as well, which is a difficult thing in itself and often quite frightening. But to have all of those things must have been incredibly hard.
It was, absolutely. We both struggled in our own way, and I think we We kind of, I mean, we didn't have that energy and that life that we'd had when we first met that was just full of adventure. And I think he missed that more than I did, but didn't speak about it. I mean, that's my assumption, that he was missing it. I knew how much he loved it. And we had work. He had ups and downs with different roles. He worked in field marketing in telecoms when that industry was booming. But that was quite high pressured, quite intense as well. So he was challenged by that. But typically, as men often do, I think he saw himself as the provider and the carer. And not only with our first daughter, but when Ada, our second daughter, came along, I had postnatal depression with both. And he stepped up again, cared for everybody, took on that role of carer and provider that he'd always maintained. So I think we didn't stop to think, this is awful, and why is this happening to us? And maybe a few moments might have been like that, but you just get on with things, and you think maybe this is what life is supposed to be. We know life isn't all roses. It is a struggle. And we just kind of accepted that, really.
How was work for Steve? Was he able to focus on work, or did that bring its own challenges?
In the early days, he loved his job, I think before having children, and when there was space and time to enjoy work, he loved leading a small team. He thrived on that, and was a really personable manager and leader. But as time went on, the roles that he did changed. He was asked to do different jobs and work for different clients that weren't particularly right for him. There was one in particular where he was kind of embedded into a client organisation for a chunk of time, and he would go to the office there regularly. But it was a very toxic workplace, and the leaders there did not treat outsiders particularly nicely, and it was awful. It got to the point where he was shouted at, stuff was thrown at him, he was spat at times, and it was described as a wolf culture by many of the people that worked there and who are still impacted by it now and who I've kept in touch with. And I could see it really damaging Steve's self-esteem and that kind of energy that he'd once had for work. And I'd encouraged him to go in and speak to the leader of the agency that he worked for to insist on being moved to a different client, which he was so apprehensive about. He'd been made redundant several times before. He was terrified of what he referred to as kind of rocking the boat, making a fuss, wanted to just keep quiet, head down, get on with it. But as time went on, I insisted, and he was moved, but onto another kind of job that wasn't suitable for him. And that, again, took its toll. That was working from home, which meant he was closer to me and the girls, and that was the benefit of that job. But it wasn't challenging him and testing him in the right way, and it wasn't giving him what he needed in a kind of professional space. But then there was a point in time where he was given a new project, which was kind of back leading a team, getting out in the field. And I felt that was going to be the turning point for us, and for him mainly. But sadly, it didn't work out that way. I felt terribly sad for him. I hated seeing him in that place. I hated that contrast from the person I knew he was and he could be to the person I could see in front of me now.
He tried to change job, didn't he? Did that trigger things for him, that going back to the workplace?
He'd sort of gone part-time for a while doing this role that wasn't particularly right for him and working at home. What that did mean was that he could help me, as Ada, who was only 2 at the time, was not sleeping, and we were still trying to get back on our feet after those early baby days where she'd been poorly and in and out of hospital too. And then he was offered this new role managing this team. What I hadn't realised, and what he'd not told me, was that the client where this role would be was a subset of that toxic company that he'd worked for before. And that was clearly a devastating factor, because the day that he was due to start that role, he was required in the office to meet the team and kick everything off. And that was the 12th of November 2018, which was the last time I ever saw him. He left the house in a normal, jolly mood, confirming that he would pick Evie up from Cubs on his way home, as he always did on a Monday. And off he went to start that new role, and he never arrived.
When did you realise that there was something wrong here? I'm sure that day's probably etched horribly into your mind.
It is indeed, yeah. I had a call from his workplace, from somebody in HR, to say that he'd not turned up, which was around mid-morning. He worked, the office was about an hour away, and it was, the journey there involved kind of back lanes and country roads. So I, not having the information I do now, and thinking he was just heading off to start this exciting new role, I assumed perhaps that his car had broken down. He was stuck in an area with no signal, and that was why he wasn't answering his phone to me or his employer. But as the day went on, there was no sign of him, and no response at all. And the hours ticked by, and the panic rose. And it was around kind of mid-afternoon that I contacted the police, and I reported him as a missing person. That's also when I just went into this frantic mode then, and the kind of reality that he was missing was kicking in. We'd been together for 18 years, and we were in touch daily, whether we were texting or phoning each other about the kids, or what we were having for dinner, or what was happening that evening. So this was just completely out of character. And I then started phoning hospitals, thinking perhaps it wasn't a broken down car, perhaps it was an accident. And there was no trace of him there either. I was phoning friends and family and trying to find any sort of trace of him, and no luck there either. And it was that evening that the police came and took the details, took away some photos. But they weren't too concerned either, because there was no record of any sort of mental health issues or any reason why he would be in any danger, or anybody else would be. I do recall that night, it was so cold, and again, it was November. The children were 9 and 2, and I'd put them to bed. And I remember looking out onto the driveway where he'd always park his car, and seeing this kind of empty space, and the street light was shining down onto the driveway, almost kind of taunting me that there was this big empty space where he should be, and it kind of highlighted his absence. And it's a vision I still see to this day if I look out of that window, so I keep that blind shut most of the time. But that was the first night that he was missing, and the kind of start of this shitstorm of horror.
How did friends and family come and rally round you and support you, and who was with you?
So we don't have a huge family. It was mainly friends, my friends, who gathered round straight away, mainly female friends. There was a little band of them. Most of them seemed to be called Emma for some reason, but there was a few that just kind of went into fix-it mode. We will find him, and we'll put out stuff on social media. I hate social media, particularly things like Facebook, but I was encouraged to put an appeal out. And over the course of the next 2 days, friends were helping with the girls, with the school runs and dinners and things like that. We'd started off telling the girls that Daddy was staying over at work, but after a couple of days I had to be honest and explain, particularly to Evie, who was 9 and very curious, that we didn't know where he was. And that was hard. So friends were helping to support with that.
That innocence of youth sometimes can be a great pressure valve, can't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
You said a couple of days had passed. How did the police come to tell you that they'd found Steve and this wasn't a missing persons case anymore?
So they'd been coming round every sort of 12 hours to the house to just update me on what they were doing to try and find him, which was very little because he wasn't a high priority case. But the Wednesday morning, I saw the police car pull up outside the house, and I could see straight away that there was something different. There were 2 police officers instead of 1, and they took their hats off and tucked them under their arms like a kind of mark of respect, like you see them do on the police dramas on the TV. I heard my mum screaming. She'd been there and opened the door to them, and obviously received that news that nobody was expecting. And then they came into the house and delivered that news to me.
Being very careful about it, Caroline, but how on earth does somebody sit you down and tell you that they found your husband's body?
So I recall one of them stood directly in front of me, actually. I was kind of shakily stood up, and they put their hands firmly on my shoulders and looked me directly in the eyes and said these 15 words that I'll never forget. They said, "We found him. He's not alive, and it's clear that he's done it to himself." And that was all I recall them saying. I then just remember thinking I was going to be sick and kind of sobbing and falling down, and having my friends trying to hold me up, as well as dealing with my mum, who was clearly struggling as well. And my best friend Emma was there, and she is a fixer, and she went into fix mode immediately and said something like, "Everything's going to be okay." And I remember my mum saying to her, "How the hell is anything ever going to be okay?" And Emma looking quite, "You've got a point there, really. I can't fix this."
You wrote about this moment in your book, and I think the words in there are really quite powerful. Would you be happy to read that section for us?
Yes, I will. And before we knew it, the police were gone. It was just us and this big, heavy, dark mass of shock that had descended on my home. The nausea didn't leave. I sat and hugged the sick bowl while stuff seemed to be happening around me in slow motion. When it came to telling my older daughter, Evie, Emma had been given a phone number for a charity called Winston's Wish that specialises in supporting bereaved children. She was told they'd be able to help with the words we would need to explain what had happened. I watched her sitting on the floor scribbling down notes, which she relayed to me after the call. A safeguarding representative from Evie's school seemed to appear from nowhere, and she was suddenly sat at my dining room table with a load of printouts and leaflets. She gave us some helpful information, website links, contact numbers and guidance. She helped by explaining the different ways that Evie might respond. At that point, Emma had said she would do whatever we needed and suggested that the girls could stay with her for a while. My immediate response was to say that I needed my babies to be with me, and I felt that they should be in their own home at a time like this. Ada continued to play and seemed oblivious to what was unfolding around her. It didn't feel right to sit her down and try to explain it all to her. She was so tiny and bright and pure, and I couldn't imagine her brain being infected by something so terrible. Evie, on the other hand, was in a different place. And at 9 years old, mature and inquisitive, she would need telling straight.
How on earth did you do that, telling Evie?
I just remember being kind of feeling like I had no alternative. I remember the police telling me that it had been reported in the media and I needed to be the one to tell her, or at least that was their recommendation. And this woman that had came from the school network. So I knew there was no alternative. I just had to do it. And I was her mum. Didn't stop it being the worst thing I'd ever had to do in my life. And I remember walking to the school with Emma beside me, and I was reciting these words that she'd been given by Winston's wish so that I wouldn't forget them. And she was almost having to hold me up as we walked there. And when we arrived, it's only a 5-minute walk, I could see Evie stood next to the deputy head, who was a really tall guy. She looked so small beside him, and she had this big smile on her face. I think as a child, everything is innocent. You assume that mum and godmother turning up in the middle of the day is a good thing, and perhaps some good news about dad. And then she realised very quickly that it wasn't good. And we were ushered into the parents' room, where we were surrounded by the after-school club leaflets and the Tupperware boxes from the bake sale that had happened the weekend before. And in that kind of innocent environment, I had to drop this bomb of horror on my own child and tell her that Daddy had stopped himself from breathing and had died, and we wouldn't see him again. And I think I expected this big, overwhelming reaction. But she didn't really react. And as we walked home, she started talking about the things she'd been doing earlier that day in class. And that's when I realised that news like this is going to take some time to sink in. And it did. The following days were a bit of a blur, but I know that as time went on, she started to realise that the kind of depth and gravity of what had happened.
In those days that went on, you said you had Emma there beside you when you went to the school. How did Emma support you and protect you in those days?
She was incredible. She did absolutely everything that a person could need in a moment like that. When it comes to somebody dying, there's a ton of stuff that we need to do. But when it comes to somebody dying by suicide, you can times that by 100. There's so much admin. There's police reports that you need to give. I recall she went and had to sort out his car. She helped with the girls, bathing them. The contrast of things that she was doing was just unbelievable. She literally moved in with us for the first few weeks and just did everything. And then when it came to the funeral, I recall that somehow between us all, we'd put together a eulogy. And I remember the night before saying to her, I won't be able to hear this being read out. I can't listen to it. And her response was, right, okay, we're going to desensitise you to this, and we're going to spend hours reading it over and over again so that you're so bored of hearing it that you just don't care. And I remember that night getting the red wine out, and she stood up. She's a bit of a kind of public speaker performer as well, and she decided to read this eulogy out over and over again, but do it using different accents each time. And hearing her try a Scottish accent to read out this very sensitive set of words was something that actually made me laugh a lot. And we got to the point where we were laughing so much we closed the curtains, because we felt this, we can't let neighbours see us laughing the night before my husband's funeral. But it was literally the only way that we could get through that night and prepare for that moment. And it worked to some degree. I mean, it was still the hardest day ever, but she'd taken the edge off it with a bit of really dark humour.
Dark humour can often be quite useful, used at the right time, can't it?
It's been used a lot.
What about you, Caroline, through all this? You mentioned earlier on you'd been struggling with some postnatal depression. How was your own mental health in this, what would have been an incredibly dark time?
So first of all, it was just shock and fear. And I've heard loss by suicide described as grief with the volume turned up, and it's those big emotions that just... I remember the noise of these emotions being just deafening and not being able to think straight or know which way was up, and it was just exhaustion to begin with. But then as the weeks went on and I was starting to realise that I had a role as a double parent and a widow, and my identity had changed completely, that's when it really did start to negatively impact my mental health, and I went drastically downhill over time to the point where I was drinking heavily, I was self-harming. I'd spoken to my GP who'd put me on a course of sertraline. I saw a therapist who immediately diagnosed me with PTSD, and I had some very helpful PTSD therapy. But yeah, my mental health took a proper battering, but I had to keep it together enough to function for my children, and that was my priority.
And we're going to come on and talk about how you turned all that around from surviving to thriving in just a second, Caroline. But let's take a pause just now while I give out the details for Mikey's line. Because if you're listening to this and it's striking a chord and you need someone to talk to, then you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 7755, or contact them on Messenger, web chat and WhatsApp. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. Are you all right, Caroline?
I'm
Carry
okay.
on.
Yeah.
You have turned all this around, and the third section in your book is called Hope, isn't it?
It is.
Let's hear a short reading from the beginning of Hope.
So yeah, from that moment of hitting rock bottom, I had to find some ways to dig around and find those big girl pants that I knew I had somewhere, and I found them in the back of the drawer and I put them on, and that's when things turned around. And this kind of helps to reflect that kind of moment. We are scarred, but we are stronger. And the love we have between us now shines even more brightly in this darkness. Today, granted new perspective by the passage of time, I've broadened my thinking beyond this tragedy and looked at how our tiny trio fitted into the bigger picture to fully embrace the power of three. On my journey, I've drawn strength from three areas of my life, what I call my triangle of recovery. There's the power of me, and it's all about digging deep to rediscover the strength I had in myself, build on what I already knew, and develop the skills and experiences I needed for a happier, more hopeful future. The power of my children acknowledged and celebrated the resilience, courage, and tenacity that my daughters were sharing with the world. And the power of my community was about embracing the right people, learning from others, and being part of something bigger, brighter, and stronger.
Let's unpick those points of the triangle, Caroline. How did you start to embrace the power of three in amongst a world where it must have felt like all hope was lost?
It really did. I'd struggled. I'd kind of got a bit obsessed with numbers and how we'd gone from a 4 with kind of... I pictured this square where it had its 4 straight sides and its 4 tidy corners, and that was Steve and me and our 2 girls, and we were now no longer a square. We weren't a 4, we were this 3, and I couldn't get to grips with that, and it was part of why I ended up in such a dark place. It was during COVID, actually, in the depths of the first lockdown, I started seeing a therapist, a new therapist. It was all online, and she recognised how absolutely exhausted I was and how I was struggling with any sense of optimism. And she made a promise to me, and she said, I will carry hope for you until you're ready to carry it for yourself. And I remember being so struck by this gesture and this promise. And I didn't want to let her down, and I didn't want to let myself down. And I allowed her to start carrying hope for me. And this is where things started to turn around. And she began to help me with that power of me element, which started with my mental health. And then another part of that power of me kind of corner of my triangle was all about my physical health. So I started, once we got back to normal after COVID, I started at a gym. I was boot camping 3 or 4 times a week, and that was making a massive difference. There's a sign above the boot camp door that says you're only 1 workout away from a good mood. And I think that's so true. And never before have I felt that as much as I have now, the kind of power of a good workout and the impact that has on every aspect of how I feel.
And how did you adjust your sights on what you were trying to achieve as a mother? You said double parenting earlier on, but professionally and personally as well.
I wanted to be the perfect mum. I thought my children deserved the perfect parent, particularly as there was only one of us now. And that was not achievable. I had to accept that perfectionism had to be chucked out the window. And when I accepted that, things got a lot better. I realised that all they really needed was love and care and attention, and for me to listen to them. So that helped massively with that. And as I started to feel a sense of control coming back, and the girls were starting to get a bit older, I was able to apply myself more to work and find the other aspect of me again, which was that kind of professional life and being a communicator in my day job, and loving what I did. And I even found the time and the space to do a diploma that I'd put on hold for 5 years. And I nailed my diploma, which was a massive achievement and gave me a huge boost. So it was all things like that came together to kind of find myself again, as it were.
And you mentioned the girls there. They were 9 and 2 when Steve died. How old are they now?
So they're now 15 and 8, and they are the second part of my triangle of recovery, because they're my world, really, and I'm so incredibly proud of everything that they do and that they are. But I started to see these kind of green shoots of resilience showing in them even before I felt it in myself. And that was a massive motivation for me. It's incredible what children can achieve against all odds, and how they bounce back and how they just get on with things because that's what has to be done. And I could see that in them, and this tenacity that they were showing to the world. And that boosted me on and has helped me ever since to just be even more proud of them than I ever otherwise would have been.
What surprised you most about their resilience? Because I know you were really honest with Evie. You described that earlier on, and you've been honest all the way through this with the girls as they've grown up. But what's really surprised you about their resilience?
I think it's I had a lot of anger towards Steve, and they haven't. They have an understanding and acceptance that he didn't abandon them. He loved them, and he would have preferred to have been here with them if he'd had that choice, which obviously circumstances meant that he didn't. And there's no ill feeling whatsoever. And I think that's enabled them to accept what happened and to know that they're still valued, important, amazing human beings in their own right. And that's never been shaken in any way. I'm so relieved by that, because it's enabled them to turn into reasonably well-adjusted young people who even now support others. Evie's a mental health ambassador at school, and Ada encourages other people to look on the bright side of things and be positive. And one of her little friends at school has lost his dad in a different way. He had a brain aneurysm, but she's kind of gravitated towards him and helped him when he's feeling sad too. They've got so much to give, and I'm astounded by that.
It sounds actually like this horror has shaped them in quite a positive way in some regard.
Absolutely. I mean, there's going to be this missing piece of our family forever, and this pain that we will carry forever. But I think it's made them stronger and more capable and more mature, but also more willing to help and support and love other people too.
The third part of your triangle was the power of your community. Tell me about your community and how has it helped you?
Oh, in so many ways. From the very early days, it was things like the meal train that was organised by local friends and like the playgroup that Ada would go to at the time. They all kind of got together in the school community and created this meal train where somebody would bring us a meal every night. And it wasn't just about the food. It was about the care and the smile that came with that meal, and that made us feel that we weren't alone. And then beyond that, I started to share my story a few years back, and I would talk about how I'd been impacted, and I would share that on LinkedIn. I'm not a fan of other social media channels, but LinkedIn felt like a safe space to share what's quite a grown-up story. And it was so well received, and through that I connected with all sorts of different pockets of communities who are supporting not only suicide prevention, but more importantly to me, suicide postvention, and looking after those of us who have been impacted, and how we need to come together. And I kind of became part of this amazing movement of incredible, strong, damaged, but just amazing people that want to help each other. And that's the community I refer to these days, that I couldn't do without, that I feel part of something where I'm recognised for my scars and how they bring even more value to this world now.
And that's where I first came across you, where I first read about your story, Caroline, on LinkedIn. But how has that openness and honesty, because we know there's lots of stigma attached to loss by suicide, but how has breaking that stigma for you and that honesty helped you?
It's helped me in so many ways because I can be honest. I mean, there's examples of other people I've spoken to, women in exactly my position with young children who have never been allowed or felt allowed to show their anger because of not wanting to offend other people, their partner's parents, for example, or wider family. And I've seen the damage that's caused, and I've been determined not to allow that to happen to me. I have no shame in speaking about this situation, what happened to Steve, what the result of that, and the impact on me and my children. I feel that my children deserve to have their voices heard too, and I'm determined to make sure that continues to happen, although they're now very capable of making their voices heard themselves, especially if mine is going. yeah, it's helped me enormously to process my thoughts and feelings. I've connected with people who have given me different perspectives. I was asked a question not that long ago, actually, which took me by surprise enormously and came out of the blue. And this chap who was a therapist from Australia, actually, who I connected with, he said to me, What do you think Steve would say if he were to come back now and was able to speak to you? And the one thing I've carried with me so far has been the anger. And in that moment when he asked me that question, the anger just dissolved, because I could picture Steve with his long scruffy hair stood in front of me saying, "I'm sorry," and saying, "I didn't mean to cause you any pain." And in that moment, that anger disappeared. And had I not connected with that amazing guy on LinkedIn who'd asked me that question, I'd still be carrying that anger now. So I'm grateful to everybody that's helped me to process all of this and continues to help me. There's no end point. It's ongoing. And I'm hopeful that more and more of these conversations will continue to evolve my thinking and my the way that I then pass that on and support other people too.
We've talked about your mum and Emma already. I think, having read about her, I think everybody needs an Emma in their life, frankly.
Absolutely.
But how much does their support continue to help you today?
Oh, massively. It's evolved hugely from that kind of support that I needed when things were raw and I couldn't function. And now they support me in a very different way. Mum is the go-to person for the girls. She lives down the road. She's there for picking up with school runs, and she just adores the girls and is there for them all the time. And Emma's kind of more there for me and the girls. So she's there with kind of virtual support for them if they want to chat through homework or play some games that I don't understand on Roblox. She will do that. She will make sure that Mother's Day gifts are bought for me and do the things that Steve would otherwise be doing in that kind of role as well. And she's there to bounce ideas around. I'm now running my own business, which is Daddy Blackbird Communications, and she's been there to sanity check everything with me and chat through different ideas for the future. So just, all the things that you would turn to a partner for, that's Emma's role in my life.
She sounds wonderful.
She's incredible.
You mentioned Daddy Blackbird there, and that's the name of your book, Caroline. My very last question is, what's the significance of the blackbird?
That's a lovely question to end on. I'm pleased that's where we are now. So it wasn't long after Steve died that this little blackbird would come bouncing up to the back door, and it wasn't afraid like the other birds who would disappear at the drop of a hat. It would sit there and just sort of look at me through the window, and I would call out to the girls in this desperate attempt to create a connection with Steve, and I would say, "Look, Daddy Blackbird's come to visit." And I think my mum had the equivalent with her mum as a butterfly, and I would kind of have that in my mind, that it might bring some comfort to the girls to see this blackbird and create that connection. And it really did for them. For me, at that point in time, I wasn't ready. I hated this blackbird because it symbolised this sense of freedom. It would fly around and come and go as it pleased, and I felt trapped in that moment in this new world that I hadn't chosen. But this blackbird was so bloody persistent. It never left. It was there every day, and eventually I gave in and I stopped hating it, and I started actually welcoming the comfort that it began to bring me to. And it became a good friend. And there are days when it doesn't visit. And one year, on Steve's birthday, in fact, which is in April, we went out to a local garden centre and bought a China blackbird that sits in the back garden for the days when the real daddy blackbird doesn't visit. But he's now become a really significant part of our life, and this blackbird symbolises our healing journey in such a beautiful way that I couldn't name my book anything other than that. And he means a lot to the girls and I. He's very special.
Caroline, thank you. Thank you for your honesty and trust and for talking to me today.
Thank you for making it a wonderful, welcoming space to be able to share everything. I appreciate that massively.
I was talking to Caroline Roodhouse. There's a link to Caroline's website with information about Daddy Blackbird in the show notes too. Now here's Shona from Mikey's Line with a few thoughts to take away from our conversation today.
Listening to how composed and articulate Caroline is, I kind of had to stop and pause for a moment to process the reality and the gravity of what she lived through. I think we can all understand why parts of her initially had to find ways to numb the big emotions through drinking, through self-harm. And what I was really struck by was the change that asking for help brought to her. Her loving friend Emma was there from the get-go, and that help made a massive difference. And by her kind of feeling in the depths, reaching out to a therapist, and that therapist offering to hold hope for her until she felt ready to hold hope for herself. I think sometimes, whether we're a professional or a friend, we can think that maybe our words of compassion or kindness or our acts are so small in the face of such huge emotional pain. And Caroline's telling of that just felt like such a strong reminder that it all helps, it all makes a difference. And we can't all ever know which bit of what we say or give will land. So let's just keep giving as much as we can. And the final thing I'm struck with is the healing that Caroline has worked to find in her life, and this sort of idea of the power of three, growing in sort of trust of herself, her love for her daughters, and her appreciation of this community she has around her. A sense of self, trust and community is something that each of us needs. None of us can do this stuff on our own, no matter even if there's a part of you right now listening to this saying, nobody cares about me, I do have to do it on my own. It's not true. There will be support out there. You might have to try different doors, different avenues to get it, but please keep looking for that supportive community. And the first step in that is asking for help. So please have the courage to do so.
A huge thanks to Shona and all the team at Mikey's Line for the work they do. And don't forget, if you need someone to talk to or some help, you can text Mikey's Line on 077 86 20 7755 or contact them via Messenger, web chat and WhatsApp. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. You can go and visit them at the Hive, 4 Struthers Lane, Inverness, and they're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. And all those details are in the show notes too. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.